My name is Aaron Slater. I'm 45 years old, and for the last 15 years, I've been the man behind the scenes, the one paying the bills, booking the vacations, and making sure the designer handbags kept arriving at the doorstep. My wife, Melissa, wore the label Trophy Wife like it was an honor. For a long time, I told myself I was fine with it. Before we go further, let me know where you're watching from and tap like and subscribe to follow this journey of betrayal and justice. It was my father-in-law's funeral, a gray afternoon where the clouds hung low like a ceiling about to collapse. George Whitaker, Melissa's father, had presence, sharp mind, quick wit, and a way of controlling a room without ever raising his voice. Melissa played the grieving daughter. Her black dress was perfectly tailored, her makeup flawless, and her tears, they fell in perfect camera-ready drops. She clung to my arm during the service, but her grip felt like a performance rather than a need for comfort. After the burial, mourners filled the Whitaker estate for condolences and polite conversation. Melissa moved from guest to guest, accepting sympathies like a queen holding court. I stayed toward the back, shaking hands, keeping my own memories of George from taking over. George and I had an unspoken understanding. He knew his daughter was high maintenance, but over the years, we built a quiet respect. We talked business sometimes, investments, real estate, philanthropy. I still remember him saying, "Aaron, sometimes the most valuable thing you can leave behind isn't money. It's making sure it lands in the right hands." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Evening came. I headed toward the study for a moment of quiet. That's when I heard Melissa's voice in the hallway, low but sharp, speaking into her phone. Yes, I got the call. 170 million. Wire transfers already in motion. She paused, then laughed. That cold, triumphant laugh she reserved for moments she got exactly what she wanted. "Don't worry about Aaron. He served his purpose." The words froze me. I stood in the study staring at George's old leather chair. I could almost see him sitting there, hands gripping the arms, nodding when a decision was made. The room felt emptier than it had hours before. I didn't confront her. Some performances deserve an audience. I wasn't giving her one. We drove home in silence. She kept her eyes on her phone, the glow bouncing off the diamonds she liked to twist when she was pleased with herself. Inside the living room, she didn't waste time. Arms crossed, that smug curve in her lips, she pointed toward the door. "Pack a bag. Actually, no, don't. Just leave. The lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. And Aaron, don't make this messy." I studied the face I'd lived beside for 15 years and saw nothing I wanted to salvage. Just greed. Polished, confident, unapologetic. I nodded once, the way George used to, and walked upstairs. Passport, wallet, a change of clothes, phone charger. You learn what you truly need in 60 seconds. Driving toward a small hotel outside town, I kept the radio off. The cool night air seeped through the cracked window. Somewhere between mile markers, George's words came back. The right hands. I don't believe in omens. I believe in patterns. And Melissa had just told me everything I needed to know. As the neon vacancy sign buzzed outside the hotel office, I realized this story wasn't over. Not even close.
The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thin hotel curtains like it was trying not to wake me. I hadn't slept much, maybe 2 hours total. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Melissa might not have noticed last night, but eventually she'd realize I hadn't left town. I showered, shaved, and dressed in the same jeans and button-up I'd worn to the funeral. The hotel coffee tasted like burnt cardboard, but it was hot, and I needed the heat more than the flavor. By the time I checked out, my mind had settled into a quiet, steady rhythm. I had been through worse: deployments overseas, business deals that turned on a dime, friends who showed their real colors when money was on the table. Melissa's betrayal wasn't the first knife in my back, but it was the deepest. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the small-town streets roll past. The Whitaker estate sat high on a hill, but from certain angles you could catch glimpses of it through the winter-bare trees. I didn't go near it, not yet. Instead, I ended up in front of a little brick building I knew well, the office of Edward Langston, George's personal attorney. I'd met Edward a handful of times over the years, mostly during charity functions or when George wanted a second opinion on a real estate deal. The parking lot was nearly empty. I sat there for a full minute before going inside. The bell over the door gave a sharp little ring, and Edward's secretary looked up from a desk. "Mr. Slater," she said, surprised. We weren't expecting you until this afternoon." That was news to me. "Afternoon?" I asked. She nodded. "Mr. Langston said he'd like you here for the formal reading." She hesitated. "You and Mrs. Slater?" I gave her a polite smile, thanked her, and left. As I stepped back into the cold air, something shifted in my gut. Melissa hadn't mentioned a reading at all. She'd spoken as if everything was already in her hands, done, dusted, wrapped in a bow. George was meticulous. He didn't just leave things hanging. If there was a reading, it was because there was something important to read. And if Melissa was keeping that from me, it meant whatever was in that document wasn't going to make her happy. By noon, I was sitting in a cafe on the far side of town nursing a bowl of chili and watching the frost melt off the window. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Slater," I answered. "It's Langston," came the familiar voice, warm but edged with business. "I'd like you to be here at 2. This concerns you directly." "Does Melissa know I'm coming?" A pause. "She knows you're supposed to be here." That pause told me everything. After hanging up, I sat there for a while, spoon idle in my hand. Memories started threading together. George inviting me to late-night discussions after Melissa had gone to bed. The way he'd ask about my opinion on investment strategies and quietly nod when I gave an answer. How he once joked, "Between you and me, Aaron, you got more business sense than my own daughter." I didn't know exactly what was in that will, but I knew this much. Melissa was about to find out her payday wasn't as straightforward as she thought. At 1:45, I pulled into Langston's parking lot again. This time, there were more cars. I recognized one of them instantly, Melissa's white luxury SUV, parked perfectly straight, like she was showing off to an invisible audience. Inside, Langston's assistant ushered me to a side room. Through the frosted glass of the conference door, I could see Melissa leaning back in her chair, laughing with a man I didn't recognize. Her lawyer, I guessed. Langston emerged from his office, spotted me, and gave a brief nod. His eyes had that flicker, a mix of anticipation and the satisfaction of a man about to reveal a twist no one saw coming. "Aaron," he said quietly, "you might want to keep your face neutral for this." I followed him into the room, took the empty seat opposite Melissa, and folded my hands on the table. She smirked at me like she'd already won. I didn't return it, because I had the feeling the next few minutes were going to wipe that smirk clean off her face.
Melissa's smirk was the kind that said she'd already written the ending in her head. Across the polished oak table, she leaned back, arms folded, her diamond bracelet catching the light like it wanted to blind me. The man beside her, a sharp-suited, square-jawed type, must have been her lawyer. He didn't look at me, just flipped through a leather-bound portfolio like he was in complete control. Edward Langston cleared his throat, drawing everyone's eyes. He had that deliberate way of speaking, measured and calm, the kind of voice that makes people lean in. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Before we proceed, I want to note that the will we're reviewing today is the most recent document executed by Mr. George Whitaker, dated exactly 12 days before his passing." Melissa waved a manicured hand. Edward, we don't need the preamble. I've already been informed of the contents. Let's just get this over with. That little statement was for me, not him, a performance. Langston glanced at me for half a second, then continued. We'll go through the provisions in order. He began reading in that slow, formal cadence that legal documents demand. Specific bequests to charities, small amounts to distant relatives, the estate's inventory. Melissa shifted in her chair like she'd heard it all before. But my mind wasn't on the words. It was slipping backwards to moments that suddenly felt sharper than they had before. 3 years ago, George and I sat on the back porch of the estate, the sun dropping behind the pines. Melissa was at a charity gala in the city, wearing a dress that cost more than my car payment. George sipped his bourbon, watching the horizon. Aaron, what would you do if someone handed you $100 million tomorrow? I invest most, use the rest for something that matters, I'd said. Money's a tool. Waste it and it controls you. He'd smiled. Not his usual polite curve of the lips, but something warmer. Good answer. Langston's voice pulled me back into the room, listing properties, bank accounts, investment portfolios. The total was staggering, more than Melissa had bragged about into her phone last night. And yet I couldn't shake the memory of George's eyes in the dim porch light, like he'd been taking notes. 6 months ago, Melissa had stormed into my home office, furious about some luxury resort booking being delayed. After she left in a flurry of perfume and slammed doors, George called. She's on the warpath again? He asked. I chuckled. He didn't. Aaron, if you ever feel like she's burning through more than she's giving back, remember this. Paperwork can protect the right people from the wrong ones. Langston paused, sipping water. Melissa's lawyer leaned toward her, whispering something. She smirked again. I kept my face still. Edward resumed. Clause 15. He looked up at me, then at Melissa. This clause concerns the administration of the entire estate. It stipulates... Melissa cut in, exasperated. We can skip the legal mumbo-jumbo, Edward. I'm the sole beneficiary. Everyone knows that. Langston didn't skip. It stipulates that the estate is to be co-administered by 2 individuals, Melissa Whitaker Slater and Aaron Slater. Neither party may unilaterally liquidate, transfer, or otherwise dispose of assets without the other's written consent. The air changed. Melissa blinked. Once, twice. Her lawyer stopped flipping pages. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Langston went on, his tone professional but edged with something that might have been satisfaction. Failure to comply with this clause will result in an automatic freeze of all estate accounts and properties. This provision was signed and notarized on the same date as the rest of the will. There is no earlier version in effect. Melissa's gaze snapped to me, all pretense gone. I could see it. The calculation, the sudden shift from triumph to panic. And that's when I knew George had planned this. He'd seen her greed, he'd seen my patience, and he'd set the stage for exactly this moment.
Melissa's lawyer was the first to break the silence. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and said, This clause is highly unusual. Surely there's room for interpretation. Edward Langston cut him off, his voice smooth but firm. The language is airtight. Your client's father was very precise with his words. There is no loophole here. The co-administration arrangement is binding, and both signatures are required for any transaction over $5,000. Melissa's eyes locked on mine. The smirk was gone, replaced by a thin, tight line. She leaned forward, her voice low and edged. What exactly are you playing at, Aaron? I didn't blink. I didn't write the will, Melissa. Your father did. Her lawyer jumped back in. Mr. Slater, surely you understand this arrangement creates complications. If your goal is to delay, or my goal, I said evenly, is to follow your client's father's wishes. Langston cleared his throat again, taking control. We can continue debating the implications, but my advice? Both of you need to understand something. If either of you tries to circumvent this agreement through transfers, sales, or, God forbid, coercion, the entire estate will go into probate. That means months, maybe years of court battles, and the court will appoint a neutral administrator. Neither of you will have control. Melissa's hand tightened into a fist on the table. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear, but she shook her head. Langston slid 2 copies of the will across the table, each marked with tabs and highlighted sections. I suggest you both read this in full before you leave, and if you're thinking about ignoring it, don't. George Whitaker anticipated conflict. Every provision has been tested for enforceability. Melissa's eyes flicked down at the paper, then back at me. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, looking for leverage. The meeting ended with no handshake, no polite goodbyes. Melissa stormed out first, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. I stayed behind, gathering the paperwork. When the door closed, Langston leaned back in his chair. "Aaron, I've been an attorney for 35 years. Your father-in-law didn't trust many people, but he trusted you." I studied his face. "Why?" "Because you never ask for anything," he said simply. "Melissa's been on a path for years, spending, showing off, burning through money faster than he could replace it. He knew what would happen if she ever got full control. This was his way of making sure she couldn't destroy what he built." I slipped the folder into my briefcase. "What do you think she's going to do now?" Langston smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "She's going to come to you, and she's going to pretend it's about reconciliation. But it won't be. It'll be about control. Don't set the terms." Outside, the winter air bit hard at my face. Melissa's SUV was still in the lot, but she wasn't inside. I spotted her across the street, pacing on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear. Her free hand moved sharply as she spoke, like she was trying to cut the air itself. I didn't approach. Instead, I walked to my truck, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel. I could feel her eyes on me as I started the engine. For 15 years, Melissa had been the center of her own little universe. And now, for the first time, she was being forced to share control with the one person she couldn't manipulate. As I pulled out of the parking lot, Langston's words stuck with me. "She's going to come to you." The only question was, how soon?
It didn't even take 24 hours. By the next morning, I was back at the small hotel sipping weak coffee in the breakfast area when my phone lit up with her name. I let it ring out. A minute later, it rang again and again. By the 5th call, I knew she wasn't going to stop. I answered on the 6th. "Melissa?" "Aaron," she said, her voice sharp at first, then softening into something meant to sound warm. "We need to talk, privately." I leaned back in the chair. "About?" "About the will. About us. We may have gotten off on the wrong foot yesterday." There it was, the pivot Langston predicted. She didn't waste time pretending she wasn't desperate. "I'll meet you," I said. "Your choice, neutral place." She named a high-end cafe downtown, the kind with imported tile floors and prices that made regular people flinch. I agreed, hung up, and took my time getting there. When I walked in, she was already seated in the corner booth, designer sunglasses on despite being indoors. A latte sat in front of her, untouched. She slid them off as I approached, her eyes scanning me like she was looking for an opening. "Aaron," she said, her tone warm enough to melt butter, "you look tired." "I've had better weeks." She smiled thinly. "Let's not pretend we don't both want the same thing. This arrangement, co-administrators. It's ridiculous. It's going to slow everything down. I know you don't want to waste your time in meetings and paperwork. We can work something out." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch. "What are you suggesting?" She leaned in. "Sign over your authority. I'll make it worth your while. We can negotiate a settlement, cash, property, whatever you want. You walk away free and clear, no strings." Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her. The way her fingers gripped the cup too tightly, the subtle tremor. Melissa wasn't used to being in the weaker position. "Not interested," I said finally. Her smile faltered. "Aaron, be reasonable. This is hundreds of millions we're talking about. You think your name on some paper means you control anything? I can make this very difficult for you." I set my cup down, leaned forward just enough. "Melissa, you made one mistake yesterday. You told me exactly what I meant to you. You've served your purpose. That's not the kind of thing you walk back. So if this is about making my life easier, you're already too late." For a moment, her mask slipped. I saw the flash of anger, the same one that used to show up when a shopping spree was denied or a vacation delayed. But it faded quickly, replaced by the calm, poised exterior she'd perfected. "Fine," she said, standing and smoothing her coat. "If you want to play hardball, I can do that too. But remember, you're not the only one who can make moves." She left without finishing her latte, heels clicking across the floor like a metronome set to impatience. Back at the hotel, I sat at the desk flipping through the highlighted sections of the will Langston had given me. The more I read, the more I realized George hadn't just given me power, he'd given me protection. Every major decision had to go through both of us. If she tried to push me out, the whole thing would grind to a halt. And from the look in her eyes today, she knew it. It wasn't a question of if she'd try something. It was when. And I intended to be ready.
Melissa didn't waste time making her next move. 2 days later, Langston called me into his office. His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it. "Aaron, I've just been contacted by Mrs. Slater's legal team. They've submitted a proposal to the probate court requesting to dissolve the co-administrator clause on the grounds of irreconcilable differences." I almost laughed. "We've barely even started?" "She's claiming that your involvement is obstructive," he said, "which, given that you've signed nothing and blocked nothing, is interesting." Translation: she was throwing mud, hoping something would stick. That afternoon, I got an email, CC'd to Melissa and her lawyer, inviting me to a preliminary planning session at the estate. The tone was sugary, almost polite. I knew better. If she couldn't push me out legally, she'd try to box me in socially, make me look like the unreasonable one. I accepted. The meeting was in the estate's sunroom, the kind of place Melissa loved to host him. Walls of glass, plush furniture, trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres no one ever ate. She was already there when I arrived, in a cream silk blouse and a smile so warm it could have melted the ice in her champagne flute. "Aaron, we have so much to go over." I sat, placed my folder on the table, and waited. She launched into a presentation with her lawyer, outlining necessary sales, 3 properties, 2 art collections, and a stake in a vineyard George had held for decades. "These assets," she explained, "are tying up capital we could use for better investments." "Better investments?" I repeated. "Like what?" She didn't hesitate. "Expanding the Whitaker brand. Events, partnerships, maybe a lifestyle line. My name has value, Aaron." It was almost impressive the way she said it without irony. I flipped open my folder, sliding a document across to her. "Clause 15B of the will.
Your father's notes specify that these assets are to be held for a minimum of 5 years before any sale. His words, not mine." Her jaw tightened. The lawyer leaned in to read, frowning. "Where did you get this copy?" I said, "Langston gave it to me." "You have the same one." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the central air. Then she closed the folder and leaned back, the smile returning. Colder this time. "If you want to play by the letter of the law, we can do that. But you're going to find it's a lonely game." Over the next week, I started noticing little things. A call from the bank about irregular inquiries into accounts. Vendors who'd worked with the Whitaker estate for years suddenly hesitant to take my calls. Even my hotel reservation was mysteriously lost one evening, forcing me to spend a night in a roadside inn. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. Melissa was sending a message. She could make life uncomfortable. But here's the thing about me. Discomfort doesn't scare me. It sharpens me. One evening, I stopped by the old Whitaker office building, a property Melissa hadn't mentioned once. The manager, an older man named Howard, greeted me like an old friend. "Mr. Slater," he said, shaking my hand, "your father-in-law always said you were the sensible one. If there's anything you need, you just ask." We sat in his cramped office and he told me stories about George's cautious investments, about how he'd protected certain assets from flashy ideas. One thing he said stuck. Mr. Whitaker hated selling off pieces of his legacy just to make a quick buck. Said it was like selling your soul in installments. I left with more than stories. I left with leverage. Documents in the building's archives that proved George's intent for key holdings. Documents Melissa didn't seem to know existed. She wanted to push me out? I was just starting to dig in.
By the time the second week rolled around, Melissa's pressure campaign was in full swing. Vendors kept forgetting to send me invoices. Accountants claimed they'd lost certain files, and I'd get thinly veiled jabs from people who'd been nothing but polite before. It was obvious she was trying to build a narrative. Aaron Slater is incompetent. Aaron Slater is in the way. Aaron Slater is hurting the estate. What she didn't know was that every one of these incidents was being documented. Dates, times, names. Langston had advised me to keep a clean record. If she tries to drag this into court, he'd said, you'll want proof she's sabotaging you. The real turning point came when I went back to the Whitaker office building with Howard, the property manager. We spent hours digging through George's old files, dust thick in the air, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. That's when we found it. A sealed envelope, dated just days before George's death. It was addressed to me, in his handwriting. I opened it right there in the cramped archive room. Inside was a letter, short and direct. Aaron, if you're reading this, it means Melissa is now in control of half the estate and trying to take the rest. Don't let her. The documents enclosed will make sure she can't. Use them wisely. George. Tucked inside were certified copies of agreements that placed certain high-value assets into a trust. The trust named me as the sole trustee. Melissa's name wasn't mentioned anywhere. It was a masterstroke. These assets were legally separate from the rest of the estate and outside the reach of the co-administration clause, which meant Melissa couldn't touch them, no matter what she tried. The next morning, I called Langston. He reviewed the documents and whistled low. Aaron, this is ironclad. She can scream, threaten, file motions all day, and it won't matter. She can't touch these without your consent. Then it's time to have a little meeting, I said.
We arranged it for the following afternoon in Langston's conference room. Melissa walked in wearing a deep red dress, her lawyer trailing behind her. She looked confident, too confident. I didn't waste time. I slid the trust documents across the table. Melissa, you've been very busy trying to undermine me. I thought you should see what I've been working on. She glanced at the first page, then the second, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to fury. What is this? Your father's safeguard, I said. These assets are in a separate trust. I'm the sole trustee. They're not part of the co-administration, which means you have no authority over them. None. Her lawyer snatched the papers and scanned them quickly. His shoulders slumped a little. Melissa, it's legitimate. He's right. She turned on me, eyes blazing. You think this means you've won? I kept my voice calm. This isn't about winning. It's about making sure your father's legacy isn't stripped and sold off for whatever you feel like chasing next. I'll work with you on the estate when it benefits the estate, but these assets stay untouched. Langston cleared his throat, his tone deliberately neutral. If I may, this arrangement actually reduces conflict. It ensures that at least part of the estate remains stable and protected. Melissa pushed her chair back abruptly, the legs scraping against the floor. You'll regret this, Aaron. She gathered her things and stormed out, her lawyer scrambling to keep up. As the door closed, Langston looked at me. You know she's not done. I know, but neither am I. Because now, for the first time since the funeral, I wasn't just reacting to her moves. I was 3 steps ahead.
A week passed after that meeting. No calls from Melissa. No new urgent requests from her lawyer. It was the quietest week I'd had since George's funeral, and I knew better than to mistake silence for surrender. Melissa wasn't built to accept limits. She thrived on control, on bending situations to her will. So when she finally called, I was ready. Aaron, she said, her voice syrupy but strained. We need to talk about moving forward. This constant tension isn't good for the estate, or for us. Us. The words sounded foreign coming from her. I kept my tone flat. I'm listening. She proposed a series of compromises, selling off smaller properties, restructuring some investments, releasing capital for her brand expansion. I listened without interrupting, taking notes I knew I'd never use. When she finished, I let the silence stretch. Then I said, Melissa, I'll approve anything that benefits the estate long-term, but I won't sign off on vanity projects or short-term cash grabs. If that's a problem, take it to court. You'll lose, but you can try. Her exhale was sharp, like she'd just bitten down on something sour. You really think you can stand in my way forever? I don't have to. Your father already did. 2 months later, the picture had changed. The trust assets I controlled were flourishing. Vineyard profits were up, the historic property had secured a preservation grant, and the art collection was set for a major museum exhibition that would increase its value. Meanwhile, Melissa's half of the estate was stagnant. Every big move she proposed required my signature. Every signature I withheld forced her to sit in meetings she hated, explaining to potential partners why her hands were tied. She tried another legal maneuver, arguing that the trust was created under undue influence. The court dismissed it in under 15 minutes. Langston called me after the hearing, chuckling. I've never seen someone so furious and so powerless at the same time. The final shift came at a charity gala George had supported for decades. Melissa arrived in a gown that probably cost more than most cars, smiling for every camera, shaking every hand.
When the keynote speaker announced a major donation from the George Whittaker Legacy Trust, money I had authorized, Melissa's smile froze. She hadn't approved it, couldn't have stopped it, and now the room was applauding me for continuing George's vision. She didn't approach me that night. She didn't have to. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that she had lost not just control, but the image she'd built for herself. I never raised my voice. I never humiliated her in public. I didn't need to. My revenge was in the quiet. Every decision that kept George's legacy intact, every deal she couldn't make without me, every public acknowledgement that the Whittaker name was tied to something bigger than her spending habits. Melissa still lives in the estate. She still drives her luxury SUV, wears her designer clothes, posts pictures from vacations she has to plan on a budget she can't control. On the surface, she looks untouchable. But she knows. She knows every move she makes goes through me. She knows the assets that matter most are forever beyond her reach. And she knows that the one man she called useless now holds the keys to her world. That's the thing about power. It's not always about who's loudest in the room. Sometimes it's about who's quietly closes the door and decides who gets to walk through it. And when it comes to Melissa, that door stays firmly in my hand.